It's the ultimate horror film scenario. Running out of gas at night while driving in the middle of nowhere. Thankfully, there are gas stations everywhere these days, with many open 24 hours. So the odds of the scenario happening in real life are quite low. But service stations can still be ominous places where bad things happen. Today we're going to look at 8 unsolved mysteries that took place at gas stations. Number 8. The Disappearance of Kelly Dove. On the evening of June 18, 1982, 20-year-old Kelly Dove was working the graveyard shift alone at the Imperial gas station in Harrisburg, Virginia. Sometime during the night, Kelly vanished without a trace, but not before she reported some disturbing incidents of harassment to the police. Shortly after midnight, Kelly called 911 to report that she was receiving obscene phone calls. She asked the police to check on her, but they never showed up. Later, Kelly phoned the police again to report that she was being harassed by a male customer, implying that he had indecently exposed himself to her. At approximately 2:30 a.m., a frightened Kelly called 911 for the third time to report another obscene phone call. She also claimed that the same customer had pulled into the parking lot in a silver Ford. The police finally decided to check on her, but Kelly was gone when they arrived 2 minutes later. Her purse had been left behind, but there were no signs of any struggle or robbery. The police received criticism for not going to the station until Kelly's third 911 call. They also neglected to close the store or dust for fingerprints after her disappearance. Kelly's family had always believed that a former high school acquaintance of hers, with a history of indecent exposure and obscene phone calls, might be responsible for the disappearance. But no evidence has tied him to the scene. Kelly Dove remains missing after more than 30 years, but perhaps the most tragic part of her story is that she had traded shifts with her sister and wasn't even supposed to be working that night. Number 7. The Disappearance of Susan Widdle. At approximately 4:00 p.m. on January 19, 1988, 19-year-old Susan Widdle left her place of employment in Oak Park Heights, Minnesota, and was driving to her home in Lake Elmo. Susan was about 2 kilometers from her destination when she was forced to stop at a gas station because her car was overheating. According to the attendant on duty, Susan then climbed into another car at the station that was driven by an unidentified man. That was the last time anyone ever saw her. As Susan disappeared on a cold, snowy day, it seemed strange that her car overheated. However, an examination of her vehicle revealed that the petcock on her radiator had been loosened. One theory is that the unidentified man at the gas station had sabotaged Susan's car earlier so that he could follow her from her workplace and offer a ride once she had car trouble. The case took another strange turn when Susan's mother visited her apartment and found the red pantsuit Susan had been wearing at work on her bed. Did Susan or another individual visit the apartment at some point after she disappeared? Sadly, after 27 years, there are still no answers about what happened to Susan. Number 6. The Disappearance of Tangina Hassan. At approximately 9 p.m. on October 2, 2008, Jamrul Hassan visited a gas station in the suburb of Detroit. According to Jamrul, 2-year-old Tangina Hassan was in his vehicle. Even though they shared the same surname, Tangina was not Jamrul's child, but he was dating Tangina's mother, Nilofa Begum. Jamrul claimed that he left Tangina in the locked vehicle to purchase a few items at the gas station's convenience store. When he returned to his car a few minutes later, Tangina was gone. Even though there were surveillance cameras at the station, Jamrul's car just happened to be parked out of camera range, so there was no way to verify what happened to Tangina. It wasn't long before suspicion started to fall upon Jamrul. Instead of searching for Tangina or calling the police after the girl went missing, Jamrul made the inexplicable decision to pick up Nilfa at her workplace. He acted strangely when she asked where her daughter was. Tangina's disappearance was not reported to the authorities until after Jamrul drove Nilfa back to the gas station. After the case received media coverage, the story took a bizarre turn when a 15-year-old girl came forward to claim that Jamrul had kidnapped and raped her earlier that same year. An investigation revealed that Jamrul and the girl had been likely involved in a consensual relationship. The kidnapping charge was dropped, but Jamrul was charged with statutory rape. In December 2009, he received a prison sentence of 18 months to 15 years. Jamrul is still considered a person of interest in Tangina's disappearance, but the child has never been found. Number 5. The Disappearance of Cheryl Shearer. In 1979, 19-year-old Cheryl Shearer was employed as an attendant at the Road Pump Your Own service station in Scott City, Missouri. Originally, she had worked the night shift, so her family was relieved when her shift was changed to 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. But in a cruel twist of fate, Cheryl vanished in broad daylight. At some point between 11:40 and 11:50 a.m. on April 17th, Cheryl disappeared while working at the service station. Her vehicle and purse were left behind, but $480 was missing from the register. So it seems likely that she was abducted during a robbery. The station was located next to a grocery store that was usually busy. But in another strange twist of fate, the store was closed that day because the owner was attending his mother's funeral. On the surface, Cheryl's case seemed like the perfect crime, but it was eventually linked to serial killers Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. After Lucas was arrested in the 1980s, he claimed that he and Toole had once abducted and murdered a young woman near Scott City before disposing of her body. Cheryl's disappearance was the only unsolved missing persons case from the area during that time period. It was established that Lucas and Toole were in Scott City on the day Cheryl went missing. However, after looking at her photograph, Lucas denied that she was the victim. As Lucas and Toole are now deceased and both men were notorious for confessing to crimes they didn't commit, the full truth about Cheryl Shearer's disappearance remains a mystery. Number 4. The Disappearance of Kelly Cox. On the morning of July 15, 1997, 20-year-old Kelly Cox went on a field trip to the Denton jail as part of her criminology class at the University of North Texas. As she wasn't allowed to bring personal items into the jail, Kelly locked her purse and car keys inside her parked vehicle. She hid a spare key under the fender, planning to use that key to unlock the car after the field trip ended. However, when Kelly returned to her vehicle, her spare key didn't work. She hoped to use the phone inside the jail to call for assistance, but they wouldn't let her make a long-distance phone call. Instead, she left to use a payphone at a nearby Conoco gas station. Kelly phoned her boyfriend, Lawrence Harris III, and asked him to bring another spare key. Sometime around 12:30 p.m., Lawrence arrived at the gas station. Her vehicle was still parked in its original spot, but there was no sign of Kelly anywhere. After Kelly was reported missing, the police suspected that Lawrence was involved. He was forced to pass multiple polygraph tests before he was cleared of any involvement in Kelly's disappearance. Her family has always been critical of the investigation, believing that the police focused too much energy on Lawrence. According to the family, the timeline made it impossible for him to have abducted Kelly. The police also failed to dust her car for fingerprints and may have missed crucial evidence. Nearly 2 decades have passed and Kelly Cox's baffling disappearance remains unsolved.
Number 3. The Disappearance of Andy Joe Lepley. On May 30th, 1976, 18-year-old Andy Lepley showed up for work at a Texaco station in Colorado City at 6:30 a.m. Within the next half hour, he became a missing person. When the station's owner showed up later that morning, Joe was nowhere to be found, even though his pickup truck was still parked out front with the keys in the ignition. However, approximately $100 was missing from a cash box, and the microphone had been ripped out of the station's citizen band radio. It's been theorized that Joe entered the station while someone was committing a burglary. Shortly before Joe's disappearance, waitresses spoke to an unidentified middle-aged man at a cafe connected to the service station. The man asked what time the service station opened and claimed that he needed gas for a trip to Wyoming. This man drove a flashy Pontiac Grand Prix that was attached to an unusual plywood trailer covered with a tarp. He was spotted near the gas station after Joe arrived for work and was seen driving away at around 7 o'clock a.m. No one knows if this man had any involvement in Joe's disappearance, but he was never located. Andy Joe Lepley remains a missing person. Number 2. The Disappearance of Amy Sue Pagnac. On October 5th, 1989, 13-year-old Amy Sue Pagnac left her home in Maple Grove, Minnesota, to spend the day at a family farm in Asante County with her stepfather, Marshall Midden. At approximately 5 p.m., Amy and Marshall were on their way home. But even though they were only 3 kilometers from their residence, Marshall pulled over at the Holiday gas station in Osesso to use the restroom. According to Marshall, Amy stayed in the vehicle when he went inside. When he returned, Amy had disappeared without a trace. As Amy had a history of running away from home, authorities initially thought she'd return, but she never did. Amy also had a history of seizures, so there was speculation that she may have suffered a seizure, causing her to become disoriented and wander off while her stepfather was in the restroom. In May 2014, the case was back in the spotlight when authorities performed extensive searches of both the Pagnac family's residence and farm. Although police didn't disclose what compelled them to perform the search of what they were looking for, nothing of interest was found. Amy Sue Pagnac's strange disappearance remains unsolved. Number 1. The Disappearance of Jessica Harrington. On April 26, 2013, 25-year-old Jessica Harrington was working the evening shift alone at the ExxonMobil gas station in Norton Shores, Michigan. The last confirmed sighting of her occurred at 10:55 p.m. when a female customer purchased a lighter at the station. Approximately 15 minutes later, another customer arrived and discovered that the station was unattended. Sometime during this brief window, Jessica had mysteriously disappeared. All of her personal items were left behind, and there were no signs of any struggle or robbery, but there was a small drop of blood outside the rear door. In a bizarre turn of events, one of the biggest leads came from the gas station's manager and the manager's husband, who were traveling through the area on their motorcycles at around 11 p.m. They claimed to have seen a silver minivan parking near the gas station and noticed an unidentified man opening and closing the van's rear door before driving away. As the manager didn't see anything suspicious, she never went into the station to check on Jessica. Surveillance cameras from nearby businesses confirmed the existence of this van driving through the area at that time. One possible suspect is a convicted rapist named Brad Mason, who was living in a halfway house only a few kilometers from the gas station. He had no confirmed alibi on the night of Jessica's disappearance. In February 2014, police showed up at Mason's apartment to arrest him for the abduction and rape of another woman. Mason responded by pulling out a toy gun and was shot dead in an apparent case of suicide by cop. If Mason had any knowledge about this disappearance of Jessica Haringa, he took that information with him to the grave. So that was 8 unsolved mysteries that took place at gas stations. I do apologize for any of the words, names, places they lived. If I pronounced them incorrectly, like I said, I apologize. But thank you very much for listening. If you have any information on any of these cases, I know there's been updates in some of these cases, but if you have any other information, please contact your local authorities who will get you in touch with the right people. But once again, thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.